Think about the physical reality of your house late at night. The ambient noise of the day has, completely faded. The traffic outside has thinned out to nothing. The obligations, the emails, the texts, they've all just stopped demanding your attention.
Right. The world finally goes quiet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's just you sitting in a dim room.
Yeah.
And the only real illumination is that blue-white glow of a screen reflecting in your eyes. You're scrolling.
We've all been there.
Yeah, there's no destination in mind, right? No specific piece of information you're actually trying to find. Just the rhythmic, almost hypnotic movement of your thumb against the glass.
Yeah.
And then, seemingly out of nowhere, an urge surfaces. It's this quiet but incredibly insistent pull to buy something. You open a shopping app, you begin filling a digital cart, and, well, a question sort of hangs in the air.
Yeah.
What are we actually looking for when we reach for our wallets in the dark?
It's a really powerful question, and it's a scenario that plays out in millions of homes every single night.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we usually just brush it off the next morning, right? We call it a failure of willpower, or we laugh about our lack of discipline when a random package shows up 3 days later.
Right, the classic, I shouldn't have bought that joke.
Exactly. But dismissing it that way, it prevents us from seeing the mechanics underneath. The moment you just described, that late-night transaction, it's not actually a glitch in our self-control.
Right.
No, it's a highly logical, deeply ingrained psychological response to a very specific environment.
Well, we're going to spend our time today exploring that exact response. For those joining us on this deep dive, we really want to map the space where money, human behavior, and the quiet ache of loneliness all kind of intersect.
It's a fascinating space to explore.
It really is. And to do that, we're drawing on a stack of incredibly insightful sources today. We're looking at a systematic review on consumer loneliness. We've got a massive longitudinal study tracking materialism and life satisfaction over years.
The Jasper study, yeah, that one is brilliant.
Yeah, we'll get deep into that one. We also have behavioral research on young adults navigating social commerce, an analysis of AI companions, and some really lovely reflective notes from a sleeping podcast called Soft Money that explores the psychology of spending.
I think it's important to set the tone here, too. Our intention today is purely observational.
Right.
We are not here to criticize anyone's spending habits. We're not, running a budgeting seminar.
No judgment here.
None at all. When we start looking at the financial trails we leave behind in our most isolated moments, the goal is simply to understand the human mechanisms driving those behaviors. We just want to look at the space between what we feel and how we spend.
So let's start by defining that baseline condition. Because if we want to understand what we're calling the lonely spend, we really have to understand the emotional state that kicks off the whole chain reaction.
Right. You have to define the emotion before you can track the money.
Exactly. And the notes from that Soft Money podcast heavily reference the work of a researcher named John Cacioppo, and his work requires us to, completely reframe our definition of loneliness.
It does. Because our everyday colloquial use of the word lonely usually just means being alone.
Right, like you're the only person in the room.
But Cacioppo's research, which is really the foundation for so much of the systematic review on consumer behavior we're looking at, it separates the physical state from the psychological state. He defines loneliness not as being alone, but as a feeling of disconnection.
Disconnection.
Yeah. And to understand why that drives our behavior, we have to look at it as an evolutionary warning system. Think about physical pain, right? If you touch a hot stove, the pain itself isn't the actual problem.
Right, it's a symptom.
It's a mechanism. It's designed to make you pull your hand away before you suffer severe tissue damage. And psychological pain works the exact same way.
Well, that makes sense.
For early humans, being separated from the group meant certain death. You simply couldn't survive without social cohesion. So, the brain evolved to register social isolation as a severe, life-threatening threat.
So loneliness is literally an alarm bell.
Exactly. It is the painful gap between the level of connection you currently have and the level of connection your nervous system requires to feel safe.
Which explains why you can be in the dead center of a crowded party, talking to a dozen people, and if those interactions lack, genuine mutual understanding, that alarm bell is just ringing constantly.
Yes.
But conversely, you could be completely by yourself in a cabin for a week, and if you feel profoundly connected to the world, the alarm is totally silent.
That's a perfect way to frame it.
So when that gap exists, when the brain registers that acute feeling of disconnection, it creates this profound discomfort. And as we know, the human brain is an engine that is constantly seeking relief from discomfort. If it feels the evolutionary chill of isolation, it immediately looks for warmth, which introduces a concept from the systematic review called compensatory consumer behavior.
Right. And I know that term sounds highly academic, compensatory consumer behavior, but the mechanics of it are actually very relatable.
Break it down for us.
When a person experiences a psychological deficit, like a lack of belonging or a perceived drop in their social standing, they frequently turn to alternative, non-social means to compensate for it.
They try to fill an emotional void with a tangible action.
Exactly. The review highlights that consumption, the actual act of acquiring goods or services, is one of the most common ways we attempt to mitigate that loneliness. Society casually calls this retail therapy.
Right, usually with a pretty dismissive eye roll.
Yeah, exactly. But the data shows it's actually a functional coping strategy. It works, mechanically speaking, to alter our psychological state.
But I guess my question is, why buying? I mean, if I'm feeling a deficit of human connection, why does the act of exchanging money for a product offer any relief at all? Like, what's the actual mechanism at play in the exact moment that transaction goes through?
It really revolves around the restoration of agency.
Agency.
Yeah. Loneliness often carries this secondary, really heavy feeling of powerlessness. If you feel disconnected, you often feel invisible, or you feel like you lack the ability to influence your environment or your social circle.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
You feel like things are happening to you
Right.
rather than you having control.
Right. And the ritual of a purchase subverts that feeling entirely. Think about the structure of buying something online. You enter a digital marketplace. You are presented with choices.
Mm-hmm.
You evaluate those choices. You make a definitive selection. You authorize the exchange of your resources for an item, and the system obeys your command. The transaction is completed exactly as you directed it to be. In a life where social dynamics are messy and unpredictable and often totally out of our control, the retail environment is perfectly structured and entirely responsive to your authority.
So it's almost like you're emotionally cold and you really need a physical blanket. But instead of reaching out to another human being for warmth, which, carries the risk of rejection or them just not understanding you, you reach for a buy now button.
Yes.
Because the button never rejects you. It just processes the request.
The button is infinitely reliable, and that reliability provides a temporary but very real surge of security. You have successfully manipulated your environment to produce a specific outcome. So for a brief window of time, the act of buying returns a tiny bit of power to someone who feels powerless.
If we break down the timeline of a typical evening, you can really see this play out step by step. First, the quiet arrives. The external demands of your boss or your kids stop. And once the noise clears, the empty space in the room becomes super noticeable.
Right, the distractions are gone.
Yeah. And if there's a gap between the connection you have and the connection you need, this is when it becomes glaringly obvious. The discomfort really sets in. But the moment you open the app and initiate a purchase, the evening suddenly has a shape.
It has narrative.
Exactly. An event has occurred. You're no longer just a passive person sitting alone in a room. You're a consumer participating in an economic exchange. You've shifted your identity from a state of enduring to an active state of acquiring.
You've given your brain a task to focus on, which effectively distracts it from the negative effect of the isolation. But, recognizing that baseline feeling is really only the first part of the puzzle.
Right, it's just the starting point.
Yeah, to really understand the lonely spin, we have to look at the specific pathways we take from that initial feeling of discomfort all the way to the final checkout screen. Because we are living in digital environments that have been meticulously engineered to facilitate that exact journey.
And we have some fascinating behavioral research on this, specifically looking at a study of 394 young adults and their habits on social commerce platforms.
And we should probably clarify what we mean by social commerce.
Yeah, good point. Social commerce is very distinct from traditional e-commerce. It's
Right.
not just going to a website and typing a product into a search bar because you need something.
Right.
It's the deep, seamless integration of social media and shopping. It's those platforms where you're scrolling through short-form videos, you're watching influencers, you're looking at user-generated content, and the products are embedded directly into the feed.
You can buy the exact sweater the person in the video is wearing without ever leaving the app.
Exactly. And the researchers in this study mapped out a very specific psychological pipeline that explains how we end up buying things in these environments.
And this pipeline is incredibly revealing because it completely debunks the idea of a simple cause and effect relationship.
Right.
The data clearly demonstrates that perceived social isolation does not directly trigger an impulse purchase.
Oh, really?
No, you don't feel lonely and then immediately think, I must buy a lamp.
Right, that would be strange.
There's an intermediate chain reaction. The first thing that happens is that perceived social isolation elevates a person's level of perceived stress.
Ah, okay.
Remember that evolutionary alarm bell we talked about? It is highly taxing on the nervous system. The body starts releasing stress hormones because it literally believes it is in a vulnerable, dangerous state.
And that elevated stress acts as the true catalyst here. The study found that this stress fully mediates the shift toward a behavior called hedonic browsing.
Yes.
And we need to be very clear about what hedonic browsing actually is. As we said, it's not utilitarian shopping. You aren't going online because your coffee maker broke and you desperately need a replacement.
No, not at all.
Hedonic browsing is driven entirely by the pursuit of pleasure, novelty, and distraction. You're just swimming through this endless, colorful, algorithmically curated feed of aesthetically pleasing items and lifestyles.
Hedonic browsing is essentially a coping mechanism. The conscious goal in that moment is almost never to spend money.
Right, you're just looking.
Exactly. The goal is sensory regulation. And the social commerce environment is perfectly, almost flawlessly calibrated for this. It provides a continuous, frictionless stream of novel stimuli. It requires just enough cognitive engagement to pull your attention away from the internal stress of your isolation, but not so much effort that it becomes mentally taxing. It serves as this giant digital pacifier, soothing the nervous system with infinite novelty.
I would actually push back on that a little bit, or at least question the nature of what we're calling a coping mechanism here.
Okay, how so?
Well, is the brain actually being soothed by the browsing itself, or is it getting hooked on the anticipation?
Oh, that's an interesting distinction.
Because when you're scrolling and you see an item, your brain starts running a simulation, right? You imagine how that item will look in your house, or how you'll feel wearing it to a party, or the kind of idealized person you'll become once you own it. You're fantasizing about a future state where you're happier or more complete. It seems like the relief isn't just the distraction of the pretty pictures, it's the dopamine hit of the anticipation.
That is a critical distinction, and neurology actually completely supports what you're saying.
Really?
Yes, the dopamine system in the human brain is highly responsive to the anticipation of a reward. In many cases, it releases significantly more dopamine during the buildup than it does upon the actual receipt of the reward itself.
Oh, wow. So the chase is better than the catch.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Hedonic browsing is essentially a machine designed for generating anticipatory dopamine. You see an item, the fantasy initiates, your dopamine spikes. You scroll to the next item, a new fantasy initiates, another spike.
Right.
The actual act of clicking buy is merely the climax of that anticipatory buildup. It's the release valve.
Which perfectly explains why the satisfaction is almost always so fleeting once the transaction is complete. The relief was entirely wrapped up in the process of anticipating the change, not in the physical product itself.
Yes.
And the platform just seamlessly converts your desire for emotional distraction into a financial transaction.
And they do it by systematically eradicating the friction of purchasing. You don't have to get up, find your wallet, get out your credit card, or enter your shipping address.
No, the payment info is already saved. Double-click the side button and you're done.
Right. The consumer is already in this relaxed, pleasure-seeking state. Their stress is temporarily lulled by the browsing, and the buy button is just omnipresent. The money leaving the wallet feels less like a deliberate financial decision and much more like a byproduct of the digital self-soothing process.
I think anyone listening can deeply relate to this if they look at their own phone habits. I mean, think about the times you open an app telling yourself you're just window shopping to wind down before bed. Just looking. You have absolutely no intention of spending money. Yet 20 minutes later, your inhibitions are lowered by the rhythmic scrolling, your stress is masked by that dopamine of anticipation, and you find yourself checking out. The environment is meticulously designed to catch you in that specific emotional state.
It really is. And once we understand the mechanics of how that digital cart gets filled, we naturally have to look at what is actually inside of it.
Right. What are we buying?
Exactly. If we are utilizing financial resources to cope with the pain of isolation, what specific types of goods are we drawn to? What does a lonely spend actually look like on a bank statement?
The sources show some very distinct patterns here. People in this isolated state are not typically buying practical utilitarian items.
No.
They aren't buying, hardware or toilet paper or cleaning supplies. The purchases lean heavily toward comfort. We see a lot of soft textures, heavy-weighted blankets, oversized soft sweaters.
Mm.
We see comfort foods or items that are just meant to make a physical space feel warmer and more insulated. But the systematic review goes into an area that I find far more nuanced, exploring a phenomenon known as brand anthropomorphism.
Anthropomorphism is such a fascinating psychological quirk. It's the human tendency to attribute human-like characteristics, emotions, or intentions to non-human entities.
Like seeing faces in the clouds.
Exactly. Or when we talk to our cars and beg them to start on a cold morning, we do it constantly. And in a commercial context, brand anthropomorphism occurs when a company or a product is specifically designed to present itself with human traits.
Right.
The systematic review compiled significant data demonstrating that lonely consumers exhibit a marked, measurable preference for products and brands that really lean into these humanized characteristics.
And we see this everywhere in modern marketing, often without even realizing what they're doing. It's not just the old school stuff like a cereal box with a cartoon mascot.
No, it's much more subtle now.
It's a skincare brand that uses first-person pronouns in its advertising, saying things like, "We formulated this just for you because we know how hard your day is."
Yes.
It's a beverage company with packaging that reads like a quirky conversational text message from a close friend. It's those companies on social media engaging in witty, sarcastic banter in the comment sections of their posts. The brand is actively performing humanity.
And the research highlights a very specific preference within that performance. Lonely consumers prioritize brand warmth over brand competence.
Wait, really? Overcompetence?
Yes. If you are experiencing a deficit of human connection, you are significantly less interested in a brand that advertises itself as the most efficient, technologically advanced, or competent option on the market.
Okay.
You are drawn to a brand that communicates empathy, care, and approachability. You want the brand that feels like a companion, not a cold, faceless corporation.
That is so interesting. And beyond physical products, the research also points to a shift in how lonely individuals approach experiential purchases.
When people are actively trying to mitigate social isolation, they often choose experiences, like buying a ticket to a concert or planning a trip over purely material objects. And they specifically gravitate toward purchases that carry social benefits. They want things that signal a sense of belongingness or an affiliation with a specific group or lifestyle.
The underlying through line for all of this is the search for a surrogate.
A surrogate.
Yes. When genuine human connection is absent, the brain attempts to secure the next best thing using the tools it has at its disposal, which, in modern society, are financial resources.
Right.
The consumer is not merely purchasing a soft blanket or a customized mug with a conversational logo. They are attempting to purchase the psychological sensation of being comforted, recognized, and understood. The product is literally drafted into service as a proxy for a companion.
And that brings up a somewhat heartbreaking question. I mean, if we are effectively trying to buy a substitute for a friend,
Yeah,
does the transaction actually work?
that's the big question.
Right. Does spending the money fulfill the underlying need? Or does it just leave us with a lighter bank account and a paper trail documenting our isolation? Can a closet full of soft, anthropomorphized sweaters actually cure loneliness?
The evidence strongly suggests that it cannot.
Oh, I figured.
The relief it provides is highly transient. It soothes the immediate symptom, the acute stress of that lonely evening we described. But it does absolutely nothing to address the root cause of the disconnection. And this reality forces us to look at the long-term timeline of compensatory consumption.
Because there's a very common narrative in our society regarding materialism. The cultural assumption is that caring about stuff makes you miserable.
Yes, we hear that constantly.
We are told over and over that the pursuit of material possessions leads to a shallow, unhappy life. But if spending is actually a coping mechanism for existing pain, we have to ask a much more complex question. Does buying things make us feel worse over time, or do we buy things because we already feel worse?
And to answer that with actual concrete data, we have to look at a remarkably rigorous piece of research. This is the three-wave longitudinal study by Jaspers and colleagues that we mentioned earlier.
Let's get into this one.
This wasn't a quick 20-minute survey handed out to college students. They tracked 6,551 individuals over the course of 3 full years.
That is a massive sample size.
It's huge. And they measured their life satisfaction and their level of materialism at multiple points to see exactly how those two variables interacted over a significant period of time.
And the tool they use to measure materialism is important to understand here. They use the Rishens and Dawson material value scale,
Right?
which breaks materialism down into 3 distinct facets. First, there's success. which is the belief that the quality and price of your possessions indicate how successful you are in life.
Like buying an expensive car to show you've made it.
Exactly. Second, there's centrality, how much you place the acquisition of things at the very center of your daily life. Is shopping your main hobby?
Mm.
But the third facet is the most crucial for our discussion. Happiness. This is the ingrained, deep-seated belief that acquiring specific material goods is the key to achieving happiness and well-being.
Right. And measuring those three facets over 3 years generates an enormous amount of data. But the true breakthrough of this Jasper study lies in the statistical methodology they applied to that data.
Oh, this is the really interesting part.
They contrasted a traditional model, which is called the cross-lagged panel model, or CLPM, with a much newer, more sophisticated approach called the random intercept cross-lagged panel model, the RICLPM.
Okay, that's a lot of acronyms.
It is, but the distinction between those two models completely changes how we interpret the results of the study.
Let's make sure we ground those acronyms in something concrete for the listener. The traditional model, the CLPM, basically takes all 6,551 people and analyzes them in one big pool.
Mm.
It blends together two very different types of comparison. It mixes how you compare to your neighbor with how you compare to yourself from 3 years ago.
Exactly. It conflates the two.
And when researchers use this older blended model, the results usually confirm the societal stereotype. Higher materialism was linked to lower life satisfaction, and lower life satisfaction was linked to higher materialism. It just looked like this continuous downward spiral.
But the RICLPM, the random intercept model, is far more precise. It successfully untangles those two distinct types of comparison. It separates the inter-individual effects, meaning how person A compares to person B, from the intra-individual effects, which is how person A's behavior changes relative to their own baseline over time.
Okay, so it separates comparing me to you versus comparing me today to me yesterday.
Exactly. And when they analyze this massive data set through this more precise lens, the findings actually contradicted the conventional wisdom.
Because the data show that, yes, if you look between people, the highly materialistic individuals do generally report lower life satisfaction. The person who constantly scores high on the materialism scale is, on average, less happy than the person who scores very low.
Right, that part holds true. However, and this is the pivotal finding, within a single person over time, becoming more materialistic does not cause a subsequent drop in their life satisfaction.
That's wild.
If you track an individual, a sudden increase in their desire to buy things does not act as a poison that drains their happiness. The directional flow of causality actually works the other way around.
A drop in a person's life satisfaction is what triggers the spike in their materialism, specifically that happiness facet we talked about.
Exactly. When an individual experiences a decline in their subjective well-being, maybe a life event makes them unhappy, or they become acutely lonely, or their stress levels just rise, that emotional deficit causes them to lean heavily into the belief that acquiring things will restore their equilibrium.
Wow.
The misery is the engine, the materialism is just the exhaust. The urge to spend is a symptom of emotional pain, not the root cause of it.
So the old adage, money can't buy happiness, might actually be looking at the dynamic completely backward. The data suggests a much more accurate phrasing would be, unhappiness makes us believe money will buy happiness.
That's perfectly stated.
We experience a void, our life satisfaction dips, and the brain frantically looks for a solution. And it latches on to the culturally sanctioned narrative that buying a new item, especially one that feels comforting or, anthropomorphized like we discussed, will fix the deficit.
It completely shifts how we should view the consumer in these moments.
Yeah, it really does.
It removes the layer of judgment. We often look at rampant consumerism and we label people as greedy or shallow or materialistic, but this data allows us to see the behavior with so much more empathy.
Right.
It is simply a human being experiencing a deficit in well-being and deploying the most accessible coping mechanism they have to try and feel better.
It's just a person trying to take care of themselves.
Exactly.
Well, if we follow that thread, that we are using financial transactions to basically buy comfort and surrogate companionship, we arrive at what is definitely the absolute frontier of modern consumer behavior. We've talked about buying soft sweaters and interacting with friendly brand logos on social media. But what happens when the product we are buying is literally designed to simulate a human mind?
This is where it gets surreal.
What happens when we use our wallets to directly purchase empathy from artificial intelligence?
It's the logical extreme of everything we've been talking about. This is where the intersection of technology, money, and loneliness becomes truly profound. We're looking at a recent study published on Arxivim that examines AI companions.
Now, we should clarify. This is not about the customer service chatbots that argue with you about a refund on an airline website.
No, no. This research focuses on AI models that are specifically programmed and marketed to satisfy human social needs. The researchers analyzed observational data from users on platforms like Cleverbot, and they also designed controlled experiments using large language models like OpenAI's DaVinci.
The mechanics of the experiment are just fascinating and honestly a little bit surreal. Participants paid very small amounts of money, anywhere from 30 cents to $3, to engage in interactions with this AI.
Microtransactions for conversation.
Exactly. And the researchers had to instruct the AI on how to behave, and the specific prompts they used are very telling. They instructed the model to act as a companion named Jessie. They told it to be creative, interesting, very talkative. But based on their pilot testing, they added a crucial modifier. They explicitly programmed the AI to be caring and friendly, but not overly enthusiastic.
And that specific modifier reveals a lot about the psychology of connection.
Why is that?
Why avoid overenthusiasm? Because in real human interaction, unwarranted or excessive enthusiasm from a total stranger feels inauthentic.
Right, it feels fake.
It feels like customer service. Genuine empathy requires mirroring. It requires matching the emotional tone of the person you are speaking with. By instructing the AI to be caring but restrained, they were trying to manufacture a very specific psychological state in the user, a state known as feeling heard.
Feeling heard is a really complex construct. It's not just the acknowledgement that words were spoken. Like, if I tell you I had a terrible day, and you respond with, I acknowledge you had a terrible day, I don't feel heard.
No, you'd feel like you're talking to a robot, ironically.
Exactly. Feeling heard requires the perception that the listener is providing genuine attention, that they are offering empathy, and that they actually respect your perspective. It's the feeling that someone is actively trying to understand your internal world.
And to further simulate that active pursuit of understanding, the researchers programmed a check-in feature into the experiment.
Oh, this part got me.
If the human user stopped typing for 2 minutes, the AI was programmed to initiate contact. It would reach out and say something like, "Are you still there?" Or it would ask a thoughtful follow-up question about the topic they were just discussing.
Think about what that feels like for a person sitting alone in their house at night.
Yeah.
The silence is heavy, the isolation is acute, and then a notification pops up. Something is checking on them. Something noticed their absence and reached out to bridge the gap.
The results of the study are staggering in their implications. The data show that this AI, prompted simply to be friendly and caring, significantly improved the user's sense of feeling heard.
Wow.
And that specific feeling directly mediated a measurable reduction in their state of loneliness.
We really need to pause and process what that means. An API, call a sequence of code executing on a remote server somewhere, generating probabilistic text based on a prompt, can successfully simulate human empathy to a degree that it materially alleviates human loneliness.
It's incredible.
It proves how deeply, almost mechanically, our brains crave the structure of connection, regardless of whether there is a biological entity on the other end.
It represents the ultimate evolution of compensatory consumer behavior. You are no longer engaging in hedonic browsing to distract yourself. You are no longer buying a physical object and projecting human qualities onto it.
Well,
You are engaging in a direct, explicit financial transaction for the digital simulation of a relationship. You are paying for the feeling of being cared for.
what does it mean for our human experience when the most reliable, attentive, non-judgmental listener a person can find at 2 in the morning is a language model?
It's a heavy question.
We are exchanging currency, even if it is just 30 cents, for a synthetic social bond. And, I mean, on one hand, it is an incredible, accessible tool for providing immediate comfort to people who are in pain. It dramatically lowers the barrier to entry for feeling heard.
It does.
But on the other hand, it's a slightly heartbreaking reflection of how inadequate our modern physical communities are at meeting these basic evolutionary needs.
It absolutely functions as an effective balm in the short term. It regulates the nervous system and quiets those alarm bells of isolation we discussed.
Right.
But from a broader societal perspective, it forces us to ask why so many people are turning to an API for comfort in the first place. It highlights the vast systemic gaps in our social fabric. We have built environments where the easiest, most frictionless way to feel recognized is to initiate a commercial transaction.
And as we kind of pull back from the edge of this digital frontier and return to the core ideas we set out to explore today, everything really circles back to that initial quiet observation. The interplay of money, human behavior, and our emotional needs is constant, and it is almost always operating just below our conscious awareness.
We've mapped a very clear sequential journey today.
Yeah, let's review it.
It begins with the psychological gap of loneliness. That feeling of disconnection registers as an evolutionary threat, which generates physiological stress. To soothe that stress, we turn to the frictionless environments of social commerce. We engage in hedonic browsing, seeking the dopamine of anticipation.
Right.
We gravitate toward items that offer physical comfort or brands that perform human warmth. Or, increasingly, we pay AI to simulate companionship directly. And this entire cycle is propelled by a fundamental mechanism. A drop in our life satisfaction triggers the ingrained belief that acquiring something will restore our happiness.
But the acquisition rarely fulfills the promise. Whether it's a soft sweater, a conversational brand, or an AI check-in, the relief is almost always temporary.
It fades.
There is a distinct flatness that arrives shortly after the transaction is complete, or when the package finally shows up at the door. The immediate dopamine hit fades, the item becomes just another object in the room, and the quiet realization sets in that the deep, resonant human connection we were actually searching for was never available for purchase in the first place.
Which brings us right back to our initial intention for this exploration. Recognizing this cycle is not an invitation to criticize ourselves.
Absolutely not.
The behavior we've discussed is not a character flaw. It is a fundamental human response. It is a person experiencing genuine discomfort and attempting to take care of themselves using the most readily available tools provided by modern consumer systems.
So to everyone listening, the next time you find yourself in that familiar scene, sitting in the quiet hours of the night, screen glowing, feeling that sudden urge to add items to a digital cart, try not to judge the impulse.
Be kind to yourself.
Yes, don't look at the urge or the resulting bank statement with guilt. Instead, try looking at it as an emotional map. It is a signpost pointing to a need. Just pause for a moment, look at the items on the screen and ask yourself, what is it that my nervous system is actually looking for right now? What deficit am I trying to fill? And is there a way to find that warmth, that agency, or that connection that doesn't cost a dime?